Hello and welcome to this virtual revision guide for GCSE Biology Unit 3, and this module is all about the circulatory system and the heart. So here's a typical exam question that you may or may not be able to do at this moment in time, but I think it's a really useful one to show you before we start. And this was actually in a higher tier paper at one point, but it's often more likely to be a lower tier, foundation tier question. So just to show you then, we've got the different components of the blood. The word component or composition means what is it made out of. So we've got platelets, red blood cells and white blood cells. So always try and do it with a process of elimination if you're a bit unsure. Hopefully you're aware red blood cells transport oxygen around the body. You hopefully are aware that white blood cells are your immune system, so they destroy microbes. So that leaves you with platelets. And what platelets do is they help you help you clot the blood. Things that transport things around the body, so urea transport or glucose transport, that would be the blood plasma, which obviously hasn't been brought up in this question, but it's important to know you need to be able to name some of the substances such as urea and glucose that are travelling through your blood in the plasma. Let's go through it in a bit more detail. So the blood is actually a tissue, because if you remember what a tissue is, the definition of a tissue is it's a group of cells with similar functions. So we've got different cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, that are doing similar functions of transporting things around your body. And composition, as I said before, means parts of the blood in this case, and is normally linked to questions like this on function. So let's have a look at the different compositions of the blood. So the first thing then is the liquid. If you think about it like blood cells are like boats floating in a river. The river itself is called the plasma, and your blood is over 50% plasma, so about 55%. It is a yellow colour or a straw colour, as they might refer to it in an exam. So you'd be expected to know it is the liquid, this yellowy coloured liquid, that helps transport blood cells in your bloodstream. So its key job is it transports. So it transports blood cells around the body, but you might get a question saying, well, what else does it transport? So it transports anything such as dissolved substances, and these are the things that we think about having travel in your blood. So carbon dioxide will transport in the plasma. Urea, which will later become urine, is transported from the liver to the kidneys in the blood. Digested food, hormones, proteins, and one that I think is really important not on that list, glucose. And if you were to do something called a centrifuge, which is when we spin blood at high speeds, it will separate due to its density. So the heavy blood cells will go down the bottom, but the plasma will always form at the top because it is literally a clear liquid, whereas cells are heavier, so they'll go to the bottom. So we also now look at the rest of the areas. So we've got red blood cells, and you should hopefully know they carry oxygen around the body to the respiring cells to carry out respiration. They're adapted for this role of carrying oxygen by having, first of all, the easiest one is they have no nucleus. This gives them more space to pack in this chemical called hemoglobin, which we're going to talk about in a second, and carry more oxygen. Their shape is they have something called a biconcave shape. Now, if you forget that word, you will always get a mark in the exam for saying they have a large surface area. And this means more oxygen can rapidly diffuse in and out of the blood cells. And they also have a protein called hemoglobin, which has what we call a high affinity for oxygen, so it likes to pick up oxygen. And this hemoglobin is involved in reactions within the red blood cells. So when you get to the lungs, there's lots of oxygen, and the hemoglobin reacts with oxygen to make something called oxyhemoglobin. But then when this gets to the muscles where there's low levels of oxygen because it's been used in aerobic respiration, they separate or dissociate back into oxygen and hemoglobin. And this is technically a reversible reaction, and so you need to remember that chemistry symbol there, because in the lungs you pick up, they combine, in the muscles they dissociate and separate again. So another key area you need to know is the white blood cells, and white blood cells are your immune system. And you should know that white blood cells, if you were asked to compare an image of a white blood cell picture at the top here with, say, a red blood cell at the bottom, you need to be able to say that they have a nucleus, and they're much larger than red blood cells. Okay, and basically one of their key jobs is they make antibodies, which we'll look at in a later video, which can defend your body against foreign materials such as bacteria. We also have things called platelets, which are cell fragments, and you need to know that definition. They're much smaller, and they're involved in clotting of your blood, which is good, stops you bleeding if you've cut yourself. So going to this then, what sort of question could you have? Well, you could have a question like the one I showed you earlier, and you just need to have this bit of in your head, this memory in your head, that plasma involves transporting substances around your body. And examples from this one, which isn't part of the question, but I think it was the next question in this exam, was this one would be used by plasma because you're transporting glucose in the blood, and urea has to be transported in the blood as well. So those would be jobs of plasma. The red blood cells carry oxygen around the body. The white blood cells are your defense system, so therefore they defend your body against disease. And platelets help the blood to clot, and therefore that stops you bleeding. So one area which you need to know about is then the blood vessels which carry the blood around the body. So the first type of blood vessel you need to know about is the artery, and arteries carry mainly oxygenated blood to the respiring cells, and they carry away from the heart under high pressure. So arteries away from the heart. So if you remember A and A, arteries and away from the heart. Because it's under high pressure, it has adapted, and you can see here that the artery has a small lumen. Now the lumen is the space that the blood vessels actually go through, and by being small it maintains the blood pressure. If you think about a hose pipe, if you squeeze a hose pipe, the water will come out at a faster pressure. Around the artery is a thick layer of muscle and elastic fibres, and that protects the artery because it's under high pressure. It needs protecting. Now you could get a cartoony picture like the top one here, or you could get a picture from a microscope, and this would show you here an artery. So you've got, whilst it looks quite big here compared to the picture next to it of the vein, it's got a relatively thin lumen, and the wall of the artery you can see is thick here because it starts here, and actually, even though it's not shown that well, it goes all the way to here on the artery. The vein always carries blood, it's mainly deoxygenated, so it's used the oxygen up in respiration, it's returning to the heart, so it goes into the heart. So if you remember, vein has the word in to it, and it goes back into the heart under low pressure. Another thing you need to know about veins are they contain valves to stop the backflow of blood. And if you look at veins, they have a large lumen, which means that blood is flowing through low pressures. They have thin walls because they don't need, if you cut a vein, it would feel like a lot of blood to you, but it's not as dangerous because of the low pressure. And they have valves to stop the backflow of blood. So most people know arteries and veins. But where a lot of people struggle is the capillaries. So you would have met capillaries earlier on in school because you'd have talked about the alveoli, which is the lungs, and you would have talked about blood travelling past the lungs and oxygen diffusing into the blood and carbon dioxide diffusing out of the blood. And that would be in a capillary. So a capillary is where there is exchange between substances. So your muscles are surrounded by capillaries, your lungs are surrounded by capillaries, your intestines are surrounded by capillaries, and it's the point at which materials move in and out of your blood into the cells or out of the cells. And therefore they have to be very, very small, very thin blood vessels. So they're adapted by only being one cell thick, and that means diffusion in and out is relatively rapid because the chemicals or the oxygen, whatever it is, only has to diffuse across one cell to get in or out of the capillary. And if you look at the size difference, you can see here that a capillary is tiny compared to an artery or a vein. Often in an exam they'll have a same size image, but it will say like times 1,000 next to it to show you they've been magnified hugely. Now you need to know that our bodies are double circulatory systems. So what this means is that the blood has to go through our heart twice for every full circuit of the body. So to go around the body once, it has to go through the heart twice. So the key way of remembering that is saying twice every circuit of the body. So if we have a look at this, just to make sure you understand it, if we start in the heart, the blood leaves the right hand side of the heart. Okay, it goes into the lungs to pick up oxygen. It then goes back to the heart for a second time to have a high pressure pump, which then pumps the blood around the body, which then eventually returns back to the heart. So you see it went through the heart twice for every circuit of the body. And this makes us more efficient. It means oxygenated and deoxygenated blood doesn't mix, and therefore it means that we can be more active animals as a result. Animals that have single circulatory systems are often slower animals than all mammals which have double. So you need to be able to describe the structure of the heart, and this is a good picture, but it's you wouldn't be expected to draw this. You might be expected to label different parts of it, and you also need to be able to describe the structure of the heart and the pathway of blood through the heart. So if we just go through the key parts of the heart to start off with, so first of all we have the two sides. So it is opposite to you, and that is because if you ever need to study the heart, you're never going to operate on yourself. If you're a surgeon, you're going to have someone lying in front of you. So the right hand side of the heart is on your left hand side, and the left hand side is on your right hand side. So the right hand side carries deoxygenated blood, and if you're ever unsure, the right hand side should always be thinner. The walls should be thinner down here because you need less pressure on the right hand side. And the blood comes in from either above or below, from your head or from the lower body, by the vena cava, which is the biggest vein in your body that collects all the blood up, and it comes back into the right hand side of the heart. It enters via the right atrium. So the right atrium is where the blood collects up. The blood then goes through the valves down into the right ventricle. The blood then leaves the right hand side of the heart, and it leaves via the pulmonary artery. And on the left hand side, the blood comes back in via the pulmonary vein, and the left hand side carries oxygenated blood. So the left hand side, it comes back via the pulmonary vein, goes into the left atrium, and then it goes into the left ventricle before leaving to go around the rest of the body by the main artery in the body called the aorta. So let's look at the pathway either side, because this is something you need to invest a lot of time in to make sure you're happy with. So if we start off and we do this as numbers, let's start off with number 1. Okay, I'm just going to change my pen colour. There we go. So number 1, which is there and there, the blood returns to the heart via the vein, the vena cava, and you need to know it's deoxygenated. So if this is an exam question about how the heart works, 2 marks already in that one sentence. Next thing, it enters the right atrium. So that is that part there, the right atrium, the top chamber of the right hand side of the heart. It then moves down to the right ventricle, which is the bottom chamber on the right hand side of the heart. Blood is then pumped, the heart contracts, and the blood is then pumped via the pulmonary artery to the rest, out of the heart, to the lungs, because this blood needs to pick up more oxygen and remove the carbon dioxide from it. And at the lungs, as I said, the carbon dioxide diffuses out of the blood and new oxygen diffuses into the blood, so we can then take it back around the body. So then if we come back onto the left hand side of the heart, okay, so just to remind you that this was the right hand side, and now we're looking at the left hand side of the heart, the thicker side of the heart, because it needs more pressure. Oxygenated blood returns via the pulmonary vein. And this is the only vein in the body which carries oxygenated blood, because it's coming back into the heart, but it's coming back from the lungs. That then enters the left atrium, which is at the top of the left hand side. That then travels down to the left ventricle, which is at the bottom of the left hand side. High muscle, lots of thick muscular walls, because it's about to need to generate lots of pressure using high force. And then blood is then pumped via the aorta, which is, it comes out here via the aorta to the rest of the body at high pressure. And we haven't really mentioned them yet, but you do need to know that there are valves between the atria and the ventricles in each side of the heart to stop a backflow of blood into the atria. And just in case it doesn't come up later in the video, you need to also be aware that there is a natural pacemaker in the heart, which is in the right atrium, and that is what causes your heart to beat, because your heart doesn't actually need your brain to beat. It is myogenic. It will beat by itself at approximately 70 beats per minute. Your brain does speed it up and slow it down. So one area that you need to know about then is coronary heart disease. Now, coronary heart disease occurs when the arteries become narrower due to the buildup of fatty deposits, and normally it is caused by cholesterol. And there are many risk factors that can increase your chance of developing heart disease. So risk factors can increase your chance of developing a disease, and these include smoking. It could, unfortunately, for somebody be hereditary. As you get older, there's more of a chance. If you're obese, there's a chance, and if you have an inactive lifestyle, there's an increased chance of coronary heart disease. One way of treating these can be using cholesterol-reducing drugs called statins, which have introduced over the last 20 years, and they basically slow the liver down, because the liver is what makes cholesterol from the food you eat. And that is some worries about that, because some people say it might damage the liver, and also if you have a tablet which could lower your cholesterol level, would it mean you stop looking after your own health as you go along? So coronary heart disease then, because your basically your arteries don't get blocked, so your arteries get blocked, this could cause problems. So for example, if there is a blockage in your coronary artery, which is the blood supply to the actual heart itself, what happens is there's a blockage here, let's say, then the cells of the heart below it don't get oxygen, they cannot respire, and therefore those cells can die, and if too many die, that can cause a heart attack. Now, there are two ways to treat this. You could use something called a bypass surgery, which is major open heart surgery, which is risky because it's open heart surgery and that's dangerous. And basically we replace arteries around blockages. So the most likelihood is you could have a triple heart bypass, which is the highest level. Basically, if there's a blockage here, for example, if we look here, what they've done is they put a new extension of artery here to go past the blockage, to get blood flow around the blockage. And they'll often take little bits of artery from your leg to do that, which those ones can recover, but your heart is too delicate for that to happen. The more chosen way of treatment these days is a stent, because it is keyhole surgery. So that means minimal surgery, and they actually push the stent in via an artery in your leg, so they don't have to open the heart up at all. So there's much less risky. Now what happens is a stent opens up the artery and pushes it open, which allows the blood flow to come back through. And in both cases, increasing the blood flow through means the oxygen gets back to the muscles of the heart can respire, and therefore they should hopefully recover. How a stent works is you put in a stent into the artery, as you can see here in picture A. The stent then has a balloon in it, and the stent's like a piece of mesh effectively, and it inflates the balloon, pushing the stent open. The balloon is then deflated and removed, and the stent then stays in place. And then the blood cells are able to flow through as normal, delivering oxygen to the cells so the cells can respire as normal. And it's the muscle cells of the heart that need that oxygen to flow through. So you will often be asked questions about different heart conditions. A lot of them you are given data, such as this question here, but just to give you some extra points. Pacemakers, if you remember we said earlier on, the pacemaker is a natural part of your heart that allows you to have heartbeat, and that is found in the right atrium. If your heartbeat becomes irregular, which means your blood flow isn't regular, and therefore you might get less red blood cells to your muscles, less oxygen delivered to your muscles then, which is a big problem, because less respiration will occur, then an artificial pacemaker, which gives a tiny electrical shock, can be attached to the right atrium of the heart. And you need to know it's the right atrium, and it stops heartbeat being irregular. Artificial hearts can be used, rarely, but they can be used, and the way they're often used is to keep someone alive who is waiting for a heart transplant. Obviously, heart transplants are very hard to come by because the person has to have died and leave it as a donor, and therefore you may have to last a long time and use a artificial heart. Artificial hearts can also be used to allow your heart to recover and actually rest after a heart attack, and therefore that is a useful recovery method. And there are also valves, as you know, we talked about the importance to prevent backflow of blood. Valves can get worn out or damaged, and we can use artificial valves, which are like biological valves, which are animal valves, or mechanical artificial valves to do this. And you might get a question like this one, where you might be asked to compare and evaluate the use of mechanical or biological valves. So mechanical ones are ones from we've artificially made, and biological are ones for animals. So you can see here you've got some number crunching you could do in a question like this. More of them have been given mechanical than biological. Okay, number of patients that have died, however, is higher in the mechanical ones, but not much higher if you look at the difference in numbers. So a huge number more have got mechanical hearts, and 180 died, than the ones that have biological hearts. So actually the percentage would be higher, the success rate would be higher in percentage wise for mechanical hearts. Of a percentage of patients alive after 5 years of having a heart surgery, 91% in mechanical, 89% in biological. So you'd say mechanical is better there. Percentage of patients needing a second replacement within 5 years is a lot less in mechanical than biological. And percentage of patients who have blood clots on the brain after surgery, that one is higher in mechanical, much lower in biological. So you could argue the points through of each of those points and then make a conclusion based on your own decision to answer that.